There were 60 of them. 60 cities, not scattered ruins, not legends whispered around a campfire. 60 standing cities with high walls, locked gates, and iron bars across every entrance. And the soldiers who finally saw them, trained men, hardened by 40 years of desert, stopped walking. They looked up at the walls and forgot they were warriors. They said the walls reached heaven. They said that standing beneath them, they stopped feeling like soldiers. They stopped feeling like men at all. We were like grasshoppers in our own eyes. And the king who sat behind every one of those 60 walls? Argob Bashan, the last of the Rephaim. The final royal shadow of an age the earth was trying to erase. Most people ask whether the Nephilim were real. Deuteronomy is asking something darker. What if they never just wandered the earth? What if they ruled it? Chapter 1: The Last King. Deuteronomy does not introduce Og the way you'd introduce a myth. It introduces him the way you'd write a military file. He rules Bashan, a real territory, a real border, a capital at Edrei. He controls the region called Argob, and Argob holds 60 fortified cities. He is placed on a map before he is placed in legend, and then, quietly, like a detail slipped beneath the main story, Deuteronomy reveals what Og actually was, the last remnant of the Rephaim. Not one of many, not a descendant, the last. Think about what that means. The Rephaim were a giant linked people, remembered in the ancient world as something between human and something far older, a bloodline that stretched back to an age most of history has deliberately forgotten. And by the time Og walks onto the biblical stage, that entire line has been reduced to one name. Just him. Where did the others go? What could erase something like that? The text does not answer. It only confirms the others are gone. And Og does not wander the wilderness like a wild animal. He does not haunt a cave or move through shadow at the edge of the world. He sits on a throne, in a city, behind a wall, the last living monument to something the earth was trying to forget. Still standing, still ruling, still waiting. Chapter 2: A kingdom built to break armies. Here is the piece that changes the entire Nephilim story. When the Bible describes Og's cities, it does not reach for myth. It reaches for military language. High walls, gates, bars, 3 words, each one a weapon. A high wall is a sentence written in stone. It says, "Climb this, and you will die before you reach anyone inside." A gate is not a door. A gate is a declaration. It controls who enters, who bows, who pays tribute, and who is turned away at the edge of the king's patience. And a bar, that final iron bar across the inside, is the last word. The hard refusal. The locked line between everything outside and the ruler within. These are not decorations. They are not architecture built for beauty. They are a message aimed at every army that would ever approach. You will not breach this. 60 cities speaking that message at the same time. And then Deuteronomy adds one more sentence, and it quietly opens the ground beneath everything. Besides the unwalled towns, there were very many. 60 was the number with walls. The unwalled settlements were not even worth counting. This was not a remnant hiding in the hills, not a dying bloodline clinging to a few stones. This was a kingdom built for permanence, built for domination, built to survive anything ordinary armies could throw at it. Stop. Let that settle for a moment. When you picture the Nephilim, what do you see? Most people see bodies, bones, a shadow glimpsed in an ancient text. Here's what Deuteronomy actually shows you: roads, borders, storage, military engineering, 60 fortified positions with engineered walls and iron bars across every gate. The usual Nephilim conversation asks about biology. How tall were they? Were they real? Deuteronomy refuses that conversation. It counts cities instead. A single giant can be mythologized. 60 fortified cities require administration, labor, planning, defense, command. That is not a monster story. That is a civilization, and civilizations are far more terrifying than monsters. Chapter 3: The Grasshopper Effect. Numbers 13:33, remember this verse. We saw the Nephilim, the sons of Enoch, who came from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. These were trained scouts, hardened men. They had crossed the desert. They had survived things that would break most people, and they came back shattered. Not afraid, shattered. They did not say the enemy was stronger. Every army has a stronger enemy somewhere. They said their own bodies became nothing. Their own mass vanished. They looked at themselves through the eyes of what they had seen, and they disappeared. Grasshoppers. That line has lasted thousands of years because it describes a specific kind of terror, not the fear of being outmatched, the fear of being structurally, permanently overwhelmed by something that was never going to be a fair fight. A giant in an open field is a problem you can imagine solving. A size advantage, a vulnerable moment. A stone and a sling. A giant behind a wall, behind 60 walls, inside a kingdom built to outlast every army that ever approached it. That is something different entirely. That is a civilization you cannot imagine defeating. And that is what broke the spies, not the bodies, the system the bodies built. This is usually where the Nephilim story ends. Grasshoppers, fear, retreat into history. But Deuteronomy keeps going. And what it records next is the detail most modern retellings skip completely. Not a body, not a battlefield. An iron bed. Chapter 4. The City at Dusk. Imagine approaching Argob at the end of a march that has lasted days. Heat, dust, open desert stretching in every direction. Nothing but silence and flat earth as far as the horizon. And then something changes in the distance. A dark line. Too straight to be geology, too deliberate to be natural. You keep moving and the line gets taller and taller until you realize it is not a ridge. It was placed there, deliberately, by hands that understood exactly what an approaching army would feel when they first saw it. The wall rises above the last red light of the evening sky. Torches move along the top like stars that have been captured and put to work. Silhouettes pace the battlements. Guards who do not hurry, do not call a warning, do not raise a signal, because they have seen armies approach before. The armies always stopped. The gate does not open. It does not flinch. It stands as a closed face, an iron presence, and says the only thing it was built to say, "This is not for you." Inside are streets no outsider has walked, towers no enemy has reached, a marketplace, a granary, a palace, a system running quietly beneath the stone, maintained by a people who lived under the shadow of the last Rephaim king. Not a monster's lair, a city, and the horror is not the height of the walls. The horror is that someone designed them exactly this way, surveyed the land, calculated the approach, laid foundation stones wide enough to hold for centuries, looked out at the open plain beyond the gate and thought, let them try. Chapter 5. The Iron Bed. After Ogi falls in battle at Edrei, Deuteronomy does something unexpected. It pauses. The battle is over. The kingdom is taken. The text could have moved forward. Instead, it records an object. His bed. Not his weapons, not his throne, not his crown. His bed, made of iron. Preserved and kept in Rabbah of the Ammonites. 9 cubits long, 4 cubits wide. The measurements are given. The math is left to you. Scholars argue the exact conversion. Some say 13 feet. Others argue closer to 9. But the argument misses the point entirely. The point is not the number. The point is that someone kept it. An iron bed, too large for any ordinary man, preserved in a foreign city long after its owner was dead. Measured, recorded, put into writing where it would remain for thousands of years. Why? Because conquest can take a city. It can divide a kingdom, reroute borders, rename territories, install a new king, and erase the old one from living memory. But Og's iron bed, sitting in Rabbah, was something that conquest could not answer. It was testimony, the last physical proof of a king who was himself the last proof of something older, larger, and nearly gone. The Rephaim had fallen, but 9 cubits of iron remained, and iron does not forget what it remembers. Chapter 6: The Stone That Still Speaks. Centuries after the conquest, the memory refused to disappear. Josephus, writing in the 1st century, still preserved it. He recorded that in Hebron, the race of giants had once lived. He claimed their bones were still pointed out in his own day, attached to specific places, specific hills, specific valleys on a real map, not myth drifting somewhere beyond the known world. Here, this hill, this valley, this is where they stood. The ancient world did not remember the Nephilim as abstract symbols. It located them, named their cities, named their kings, named their descendants. And that is the final layer of this story, the one that most modern retellings never reach. Stone keeps speaking after the bodies disappear. A ruined wall does not explain itself. It does not need to. It only stands there, too thick, too old, too deliberate, and lets the silence ask the question you cannot stop hearing. Who built this? What were they? And why did they need the walls so high? Og of Bashan was not the beginning of the Nephilim age. He was its last king. By the time Israel crossed his border, the Rephaim were already past tense, written in history everywhere except in him. When he fell, the final architecture of that age was counted, measured, and recorded for thousands of years. 60 cities, high walls, gates, bars, one iron bed, one name. That is what the giants left behind. Not just bones and whispered stories, a kingdom built to last forever. And some of those stones are still standing today, silent, unmeasured, speaking in a language older than any written text. The last vocabulary of the Rephaim, written in stone.